So, you've decided to apply for a grant, but the paperwork is a nightmare, right? Wrong. Filling in a grant application form can seem a daunting prospect. I mean, why do they need to know all this stuff? The answer to that question is simple. So that the fund holder, the person or organization deciding which project or business to give a grant to, can make the best possible decisions. The application process is designed to create a level playing field. It's about fairness. So asking everyone the same questions and for the same information makes it easier for the person assessing your application to reach a fair decision. Remember, you won't be the only person applying for a grant, and the funds available are nearly always limited. In this video, we will give you some top tips about applying for grant funding and filling in grant application forms. They won't guarantee anything, but they will help you put your best foot forward, and that gives you the best possible chance of success. First, what is a grant? A business grant is usually public money. That's taxpayers' money to you and me, our money, designed to support a business or organization in delivering something the government wants. The first thing to note is that there are always strings attached. A grant isn't free money, and there will always be an obligation to deliver something the provider wants. And because it's public money, the provider, that's the organization the government has given the money to administer, like a local authority or a charity, has a duty to ensure that the fund is used wisely for the purpose the government intended, to deliver the maximum benefit for the taxpayer, that's us. And so the grant application process is supposed to help make sure that all these things happen. The things that the government or the provider wants the grant to achieve are sometimes called outputs and outcomes. And in business terms, these are usually pretty easy to understand. So typically, stuff like new jobs or growth, skills training, a competitive advantage, or maybe a reduction in carbon footprint. So, the first thing to think about is, do I want the same thing as the provider? Will I deliver what they are looking for? And just as importantly, if I get the grant, will it help my business? Will it make a difference? If the answer to these fundamental questions is yes, then go for it. But if the answer is a definite no, then don't force it. If the grant doesn't work for your business, walk away. Don't waste your time. And if you aren't sure, if it's a maybe, then please ask the grant provider. This isn't the last time you'll hear this piece of advice. Sometimes the official language used by grant funders seems like it's deliberately designed to put people off, but that's never intentional. And there will always be someone you can contact to ask them to explain anything you don't understand. And before you start, do your homework. Read all the literature and the blurb carefully. Check the website. If something isn't 100% clear, don't be afraid to ask questions. Sometimes there will be a section of FAQs on an application form or a grant website, so check them out. But if there isn't, and if you're unsure or confused by any part of the application process, now is the time to ask. Don't worry about looking stupid. Fund holders will be happy to answer questions before you apply, to help ensure that you make the best possible application and save time and effort later on. Is it the right grant for me? Let's start with something called eligibility. Eligibility determines who can or can't apply for the grant. Basically, whether your business is of the type targeted by the provider for support. Most grants have some kind of eligibility criteria. Some grants exclude certain types of business, like shops or retailers, farms or food businesses, and this is usually because there's another grant aimed directly at them. Some grants target businesses of a certain size, a micro business or an SME, for example, or businesses in a particular location or geography. And sometimes the target is a specific business sector like manufacturing, engineering or tourism, and hospitality. Often, the target is a mix of one or more of these factors. So before you even start looking at an application form, you need to find out whether your business is eligible in the first place. So always check eligibility criteria. Who can and can't apply should be clearly stated. And again, if you aren't sure whether your business fits, then ask before you apply. Often, the first question on an application will be looking to confirm eligibility. So they'll ask you questions about your business, its size, location, and what you actually do. Okay, so let's assume you are eligible to apply for the grant. So the next thing to check is if the grant will fund the kind of thing you want to do. For example, is it a capital-only grant, or will it fund revenue expenditure too? If you don't know the difference between capital and revenue expenditure, or if you're not sure, ask. You don't want to waste your time filling in an application form for something the grant can't fund. How to apply? Let's assume your business is eligible to apply for the grant, and your project or investment fits the funding criteria. So now it's time to have a look at the application form and read it through carefully before you start filling it in. What sort of information or evidence does the fund holder want? Do you have it all at your fingertips? Or will you have to go away and look for it? Or maybe even get some help from your business advisor, bank, or accountant? Most applications nowadays are made online, and many require you to upload supporting evidence or documents. Make sure you have them to hand in the correct format before you start bashing away at the keyboard, or you might run the risk of document timing out and having to start it all over again. It is a good idea to answer important questions in draft, particularly the narrative questions, the ones that start with the word like describe or the phrase tell us. So the question might be something like, describe in no more than 200 words what difference the grant will make to your business. Questions like this with a maximum word count need some preparation. So creating a separate document or jotting ideas down on a piece of paper gives you a chance to think it through and get it right before you try and fill in the actual form. You can even share your draft with peers or colleagues, or ask someone you trust for a second opinion, and to check that you have given the provider the right answer, the best answer, and all the information they need. And if there is a word limit, stick to it. And please remember to always answer the question. This means you have to read the question and understand it. Most of the things you will be asked about as part of an application will be stated clearly and obviously. And remember, if a question isn't clear or obvious, ask. And before you complete the application and press send, or better still, when you come to the end of each page of an online application, go back and make sure that you have answered all the questions properly and provided all the information required to the best of your ability. And don't leave sections or questions blank. If the application form asks you for information or evidence and you don't provide it, you run a serious risk of your application simply not being considered at all. The fund holder won't be asking you anything, just for the hell of it. All the questions will be designed to help the provider make a fair decision. So leaving a question blank is never a good idea. Again, if you're not sure what the question means or exactly what information the provider is looking for, ask. Finally, let's talk about match funding. What does that mean? Well, most grants won't fund 100% of the total cost of the project or investment, so they will be expecting you, the applicant, to make a contribution. From the fund holder's viewpoint, if you're making a contribution, the overall risk is reduced. Or, putting it another way, if you're committing some of your hard-earned cash or precious resources to the project, then it is more likely to succeed, simply because you have skin in the game. So, how does a match work? Let's say the grant will fund up to 50% of the total cost of your project or investment. This means that the most you will have to find is 50% of the total sum required. If you don't have the required match, then your application simply won't be successful. Always check to see whether or not match funding is required for the grant. It forms part of the eligibility criteria and should be clearly stated in the literature. The level of grant funding available is sometimes called the intervention rate. This is public sector jargon for the maximum percentage of the total funding required to deliver the outputs or outcomes that the grant will support. An intervention rate of 40% means you will have to find match funding of 60%. In our example, the phrase up to is also important. You might have or be willing to contribute more than 50% of the total, and asking for less, say 30 or 40%, or even as little as 10% isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you are putting more in, and those critical outputs and outcomes the grant is looking for are still being delivered, the intervention rate is lower, the risk is lower, and the grant pot will go further. Everybody wins. Sometimes, a provider will state a minimum or maximum grant figure. Don't apply for less than the minimum or more than the maximum, as the chances are your application will be rejected. Summary: grants aren't designed to be difficult to apply for, and who can apply and how much you can apply for should always be stated clearly by the provider. To sum up, do your homework. Please read everything carefully before you start filling in the form, And if you get stuck or don't understand anything, then ask the provider. The provider wants to help you. They want the grant to go to the right business for the right reasons. And they want to be as fair as possible to everyone who applies. Once completed, double-check everything over for any errors. Once you are happy, submit. Good luck!